Okay, so welcome everyone to 2023 SLCL Staff Favorites. We are so excited to have you here tonight to hear about our favorite picks of the year. We have people from all over the library system, including some departments that you may not normally get to see. So it's really great to have you all here. Before we get started, I want to go over a few aspects of our Zoom environment in case this is the first time that you've been with us. So tonight's program is in a webinar format. That means that your camera and microphone are not active, so no one can see or hear you. You should be able to hear and see us though, so if you are having technical difficulties, we usually suggest that you exit the webinar, move a bit closer to your router, and rejoin the webinar, or turn up the volume on your device. However, if you do have questions for us, you can enter them into the chat box. We will have a Q&A at the end, so if you can put your questions in there anytime during the program, but we'll be addressing them at the end of the program as we have time. But yeah, it looks like a little speech bubble, and it has the word chat underneath it, and that's how you can ask us questions or make comments. So like I said, we have a lot of presenters. So we have 12 presenters tonight. Each of us will be talking about our two favorite picks of the year. These books are not necessarily books that were published this year, just books that we read this year. So here are tonight's presenters. Myself, I'm Sarah. I'm an adult services librarian here at St. Louis County Library, and I work in Readers Advisory, which is like matchmaking readers and books. I'm joined by Harry, who also works in adult services Readers Advisory. We have Miriam from SACS, Katherine from the Clark Family Branch, TC from Bookmobiles, Sarah J. from SACS, Angie from Acquisitions, Robin from our training department, KB from Cliff Cave, Sarah L. from Bookmobiles, Blake from Author Events, and Paige from Bookmobiles. So I'm really grateful to have all of them presenting with us tonight. And you'll see there's a wide variety of picks. So it's really fun to have so many presenters. If you want to see even more staff favorites, we have been sharing staff favorites from people all over the library system on our Instagram page. So be sure to go there and check it out. We started, I think Harry was the first one at the very beginning of the month, and they're going to be sharing them all throughout the month of December. So go over to Instagram and heart us and see our picks. And just so you know, tonight's picks are all available through the library, either in print or in e-media. I did send out a handout in the reminder email today. So if you did sign up before, say, 1 o'clock, you may have received an email from me that has the handout attached so you can follow along at home. If you didn't get that handout, no worries. I am going to send a follow-up email when the recording of this presentation is ready on YouTube. So, and that will also have the handout attached to it. But the handout is clickable. So if you open up the PDF and you click on the covers, it'll take you to the library catalog where you can place some polls. So I'm going to go ahead and be the one to get us started. So I have my two picks tonight are related. They are both nonfiction, which is a bit unusual for me. I do read both fiction and nonfiction, and I read a lot of great novels this year, but these two books really spoke to me. They have a similar theme, and they address sort of the same issue, but they approach it from very different angles and have very different tones. So this first pick, Enchantment, Awakening Wonder in an Anxious Age by Katherine May, is something to a guide to the phase after wintering, which is the topic of May's first book. Wintering is like about hunkering down and sort of leaning into the difficult parts of our lives. And this book, Enchantment, is about the phase after that, where we need to come out of our shells and rediscover what brings us joy and connects us to the physical, social, and spiritual world. May is British, and they had a very different COVID experience than we did. And she talks about how after so many COVID lockdowns, as well as after her period of personal and familial difficulties, which she does talk about in Wintering and a little bit in this book as well, she had lost something of the sparkle and wonder in life. She describes being in a state of burnout where her mind felt restless and unable to focus, both kind of empty, but also unable to take in or process sort of life experience. And she even talks about her difficulties focusing on reading, which is an issue that I had too a couple of years ago, and that I talked about in a virtual program called Spring Into Reading that I held earlier this year. I'll try to remember to put a link to that in the follow-up email, but it is on our YouTube page. So Katherine May set out on a journey to rediscover enchantment, an orientation to the world that had been really integral to her as a child and a young adult, and that she felt was really important to get back. She defines enchantment as, quote, small wonder magnified through meaning, fascination caught in the web of fable and memory, end quote. And the book is organized into sections based on the elements, earth, water, fire, and air, and she details her attempts to find this feeling again through adventures like open water swimming and visiting medieval wells, as well as just examining the meaning in the small everyday events in her life. So if you felt somewhat disconnected or like life has lost its shine, then this lovely and lyrical book is for you. So my next pick is, this is not a book about Benedict Cumberbatch. The Joy of Loving Something, Anything, Like Your Life Depends on It by Tabitha Carvin. And the author of this book details the fan crush that she developed on Benedict Cumberbatch and what she learned from it. Like the title says, though, this isn't really a book about him, but about finding yourself and claiming your joy. Even though she'd been familiar with Cumberbatch for years, she suddenly developed this crush on him during the phase of new motherhood, when all of her attention and even her identity was consumed by, her two small children. And even though she finds it a bit embarrassing at first, she finds that this crush like lights up her life, and she's able to rediscover like the joy in the world. And she is able to reclaim time to start focusing on herself by watching Cumberbatch media, by participating in fan communities, and by writing her own fanzine. And she eventually wants to dig further into why people, mostly women, get into these sorts of fandoms and how it benefits them. And then that project became this book. She's such a funny and warm writer, and I think many middle-aged people, especially women, will relate to how easy it is to slip into conflating all the social roles you fill, like worker and parent and child, etc., into with who you really are at heart. And this is where the two books really meet up. Both address the problem of losing yourself to the grind and of fulfilling what everyone else wants or needs you to do. And both of them propose ways for you to find yourself again, whether that's in nature, enchantment, or in fandom. Or in whatever you love, like reading. And so I'm going to take my prerogative as the host to just say a few more words about this, take another minute to say a few more words. That this is my favorite virtual program of the year, and we always have at least 12 presenters, including Harry and I, and there's no theme except for sharing the things that we love with you. And that leads to a variety in the picks, especially this year. There's a lot of variety in the picks. And I do know all the presenters tonight, some of them very, very well, and some of them more as workplace acquaintances. But when I looked at their picks, I thought yes, I can totally see how this is something that they would love. So while each of us, hope that our pick connects with you, one of you in some way, I also hope that we can just act as examples of reading what you love, because life is too short to only read things that you think you should be reading. And while it's nice to stretch ourselves and try new things, you shouldn't really ever feel bad about what you love to read, even if people tell you that it's too weird and out there, or conversely, too mainstream and lowbrow. Like Carvin says, you should love something like your life depends on it. And if it's not one of the books you hear about tonight, we hope it is something else that we can help you connect with at the library. So on that note, I am going to turn it over to Harry.
Thanks, Sarah. So I thought of my two books like vehicles. Age of Vice is like a big, heavy luxury SUV. Takes a while to get going, and then once it gets going, it's barreling along. And just like the start of this book, where there's a crash of a luxury vehicle and 5 people are dead, out stumbles our main character, AJ. He's drunk. What is his relationship to this vehicle and these people? Well, it turns out, as you will find out, that he is the gopher for Sunny Wadia. Sunny Wadia, who is the scion, the son of an Indian crime family. Yes, this book is really, I think the cover and the style of the book is very much like The Godfather. But having read this book and The Godfather by Mario Puzo, this book is better. It's got the same themes: family, loyalty, crime, public corruption. How does an outsider fit in? Because there's a journalist in this book, Nita. And in fact, as I said, Sonny Wadia, there's Sonny Corleone. So I actually think the author uh, maybe had The Godfather in mind. But it is a terrific book about modern India and sort of the underside of it, as well as what happens to poor AJ, who goes from absolute poverty to working for a super rich crime family. I liked it so much, I read it and then I listened to it on audio when I was on vacation because I wanted to go back and revisit it. So again, it's like I said, that luxury SUV that barrels along and has an explosive finale. My second book is more like Tesla's new Cybertruck. Goes from 0 to 60 in 3 seconds. So this book by Mark Cameron, Breakneck, is number 5 in his series involving Arliss Cutter. You can read it as a standalone, and I think it's the best one of the series. This book is big and fast, starts out with a blast. The Russian mafia is out to get somebody in Alaska. They eliminate that person. Also, some people are murdered on a fishing boat off the Alaskan coast. We also have family issues because we have a Russian crime boss and his son who are seeking revenge. Who are they seeking revenge against? Oh, it might be a U.S. Supreme Court justice who just happens to be visiting Alaska with her daughter, and she wants to go on the Glacier Discovery train. Of course, she's being protected by U.S. Marshals. The author, Mark Cameron, was the U.S. Marshal for Alaska, so he writes from experience. This is a high-octane thriller. It doesn't let go. Arliss Cutter, the main character, has a Polynesian sidekick, a deputy U.S. Marshal, Lola Tiariki, and there's a little bit of romance in this book. That's not bad. But if you want nonstop action, authentic Alaskan color, and a breakneck pace, as well as multiple twists and feisty characters, I would recommend this. It is really something. I love all of these books by Mark Cameron. I think he's just a terrific author, and it's very authentic as far as the law enforcement aspects. So I will pass it on to Miriam.
Hello. So my first book is The Adventures of Mina Al-Sarafi. Shannon Chakraborty is a best-selling fantasy author, but somehow, even though I am a huge fantasy fan, this is actually the first book of hers I've read, and I picked it up because of the cover, because I think it's really pretty, and I'm so glad I did. This is a historical fantasy adventure with mythical creatures and notorious pirates, and just really brilliantly well-developed characters. The main character, Mina, is a retired pirate, and she's had a great career raiding on the Indian Ocean, but now she's retired to her mother's house with her daughter, her young daughter, and of course that doesn't last, or we wouldn't have a book. So the wealthy mother of a former member of Amina's crew offers Amina just an obscene amount of money to rescue her kidnapped daughter. So Amina returns to the sea and is swept away in tons of unexpected adventures. There's a little bit of kind of slower setup and world building at the very beginning. But if you stick with it through that part, and it really isn't that much of it, this really gets going and becomes like sit on the edge of your seat, exciting. There are demons and sea monsters and all sorts of tricky people. And there are all these complicated, interesting relationships and fabulous friendships between the characters. Amina is a complex and interesting character who you'll really love spending time with over this quite lengthy, almost 500-page novel. I also really love a historical setting in a fantasy novel. The saying of this book is really believable as being real world right up until the first mythical creatures start to appear. But even then, there's enough realism sort of intertwined with all of the magic that these relationships are very real, and it becomes the sort of fantasy that appeals to even to people who prefer books grounded in the real world. As long as you like adventure-y sort of stories, you'll like this one, even if fantasy's not really your thing. This promises to be the first book in a series, which I think will have 4 books. I can't tell you why, because that's a big spoiler. But I can't wait for the release of book 2, which sadly doesn't even have a title yet, but I know it's coming. I strongly recommend The Adventures of Amina Al-Sarafi for some adventures on the high seas. My second pick is Starter Villain by John Scalzi. So this book is an absolute riot, which I think the cover gives away. So right from the start, things are not going well for the protagonist, Charlie. He's a divorced substitute teacher. His siblings want to sell the house that they collectively inherited from their dad, but which Charlie is actually living in. He's living there with his cat. He does not have much going on in his life. And all of a sudden, this wealthy uncle that Charlie hasn't seen since his mom's funeral several decades before dies, and he sends one of his employees to ask Charlie to host the funeral. And Charlie agrees, and things immediately take a turn for the weird. All of the flower arrangements for the funeral have insulting messages, a little cussy, so if that's something that bothers you, it's a pretty cussy book. But all these insulting messages, and the guests keep doing weird things to like try to test to make sure that the corpse is actually dead. And Charlie quickly learns that his uncle was an honest-to-goodness, secret lair living, arch nemesis having supervillain, and he wants Charlie to take over his operation. So Charlie finds himself on an island with hyper-intelligent computer using spy cats, that's what we have in the picture, talking dolphins with bad attitudes, and all sorts of scheming baddies. Charlie is completely unprepared for any of this, but he's willing to try, and the humor of the book comes from Charlie trying his best to take over this operation. Also, the dolphins are really funny. This book is full of unexpected twists and turns. It's laugh out loud funny. I also picked this one up because of the cover. I'm a cat lover, and I mean, it's a cat wearing a suit. John Scalzi's great. I had read one of his previous books, and since I read this one, I've read another. And I would recommend Starter Villain or any other John Scalzi to anybody who likes a little bit of fun. So that's it for me, and I'm going to send you over to Katherine.
Thank you, Miriam. My first pick of the year is Thornhedge by T. Kingfisher. I've seen quite a few of her books around. I've heard really good things. I've never actually picked one up until this one. So one of my favorite book themes is fairy tale retellings. So when I heard about this novella with a unique twist on the story of Sleeping Beauty, I knew I had to try it out. It's short. It's like 111 pages. It starts out with a changeling named Toadling, who is guarding a dense hedge wall around a crumbling tower. And a changeling is a human baby that's taken by fairies and raised in their world, or not, depending on the fate of that child, and usually replaced with like a fairy child to be raised in the human world. But hundreds of years before the story takes place, Toadling was taken as a baby by fairies and raised in their world, only to be sent back as an adult to bestow a blessing on a newborn that was left behind, a newborn fairy. Think like Maleficent or like the fairies in any Disney movie that bestow a blessing on a child. But when that blessing goes wrong, she must try and correct her error from causing any more harm. I love that this novella had chapters that took place hundreds of years before, right after the blessing gone wrong, and during the present when a knight comes to find the treasure locked away in the tower. that Toadling then has to defend and kind of try to send him on his way. I really like this retelling of the classic damsel in distress story, because this time the damsel is not the one that you're actually rooting for. This is a sweet, quick read for fans of fairy tales, magic, and unexpected heroines. My next pick is MCU, The Reign of Marvel Studios by Joanna Robinson, Dave Gonzalez, and Gavin Edwards. It's a nonfiction book. I always like to throw a nonfiction book in, just because I know a lot of people like them, but we don't necessarily have a lot usually. This time we do, which is really great. It's about the rise of Marvel Studios, starting from the 1990s until the present day. The book highlights the dedication and the work that was premeditated to make the films in this universe uniquely individual, but also interconnected with each film and show that's made. No one could have guessed that the process to make this complex world and universe would also be the process that causes Marvel to falter and struggle with quality and viewership with its content kind of today. I've seen all the Marvel Universe movies in theaters since 2008's Iron Man. So this book, with all of its behind the scenes work and drama, was especially interesting to me. However, even if you've never seen a Marvel film, I guarantee you have at least heard of a Marvel film or Marvel or Stan Lee or superheroes or any of that. It's everywhere now. You can't miss it. Yeah, this was a fascinating look into the highest grossing film franchise of all time, how it came to be such a powerhouse, and how it might just be getting to falter. And there's also a nice after credits bonus chapter that's a nice nod to the post credit scenes in all of the movies that they make. But yeah, and next we have TC's staff picks.
Thank you. My first pick is Bittersweet. Susan Cain is known for her best-selling book, Quiet, The Power of Introverts in a World That Can't Stop Talking. In that book, Cain builds a powerful argument based in meticulous research, anecdotal stories, and her own personal experience for the many strengths that introverts bring to the world, especially the business world, despite the fact that their gifts are often ignored or even belittled in society. Given this theme of finding strengths and gifts in personality types that society tends to denigrate, it's no surprise that her latest book, Bittersweet, How Sorrow and Longing Make Us Whole, makes an equally powerful argument for the importance of bittersweetness, which isn't just a passing momentary sadness, but more of a personality trait with a tendency towards sadness and acute awareness of the passage of time and of longing. Cain shows through her research, her stories, and through her experience and love of the melancholic music of Leonard Cohen that these bittersweet emotional states, often considered problematic by the greater culture, actually correlate highly with creativity, compassion, spirituality, and love, among other important and desirable traits. Being aware of the ephemeral nature of time and of our own pain can allow us to see others in a kinder light, because we know that they too will feel the pain that we feel also well. A book thoroughly researched, but also easy to read for the layperson, Bittersweet is a wonderful book to help us understand and appreciate often overlooked traits in ourselves and in others. My next book is A Psalm for the Wild-Built by Becky Chambers. On a small moon named Panga, robots and other industrial machines suddenly gained sentience and asked for their self-sovereignty. After being granted their independence by humanity, the robots left to explore the wilderness and haven't been seen for a long time. Humanity, now without the bulk of its industrial labor, has done the work of creating a new society built on sustainability and respect for nature. In this world, a monk named X embarks on a tea service vocation. They travel from community to community, serving tea to locals and holding space for others to express their pain, their needs, or even to just have a quiet moment in a busy day, which I think we all need once in a while. Even though Dex has become the most beloved tea monk in the area, they begin to struggle with questions of purpose and meaning in their own life. They decide to pause their trip and set off into the wilderness to find, well, they really aren't sure what. What they do find, or rather what finds them, is a robot named Moscap, who is the first robot to seek out humanity since the departure. MOSCAP's mission is to answer the question, what do humans need? A question, as you can imagine, that can't easily be answered. In their travels together and through their budding friendship, MOSCAP and Dex start to explore the complexity of the robot's question, as well as Dex's search for purpose and humanity's place in the world. And I pass it off to Sarah J.
Hello, my name is Sarah, and my first pick is Starling House by Alex E. Haro. The author has won the Hugo for some of her short fiction. Her debut novel, The 10,000 Doors of January, was nominated for a Hugo, a Nebula, a Locus, a World Fantasy, and was a Goodreads Choice Award winner. Her second novel, The Once and Future Witches, was named as one of the best books of the year by NPR. And as for me, she is quickly becoming a go-to author. I have read everything she has written thus far, all of her novellas, everything she's published in magazines. I even got the chance to see her speak with V. Schwab earlier this year. So needless to say, I am a fan of Alex E. Haro. So when I saw that Starling House was being released, I naturally knew I was going to read it. In it, both the crumbling town of Eden, Kentucky, and Starling House itself become like characters in the book. I love when the setting feels like a separate entity, especially if the setting or the house is just a little bit or a lot of bit creepy. Starling House introduces us to Opal. Her mother has died. She's been trying her best to raise her younger brother, Jasper. They live in a local rundown motel, and she will do anything to make sure that Jasper has a chance to get out of Eden. Enter Arthur Starling, the brooding, secretive man that lives in the creepy house on the hill that everyone else in town stays away from. But where everyone else sees danger, Opal sees opportunity. As a child, she read Arthur's long-dead relative's book, The Underland, and was completely obsessed. When she brings it upon herself to see Starling House and meet Arthur in person, she comes across a job opportunity she's just reckless enough to take. And it pays enough to hopefully get Jasper through the first semester of college. What Opal doesn't know is that Arthur has his own share of secrets that he's both protecting and keeping at bay. This one job will have Opal realizing that the mysterious house and the brooding man are the least of her problems. And she must decide, is she willing to fight, not only for Jasper, but for Arthur, the house, her friends, and the very town itself. This is one of those books that I wish I could read again for the first time. I started slowing down in the middle because I just didn't want it to end yet. I highly recommend this and any of Alex E. Haro's other books. And my next book is Unlikely Animals. And interestingly enough, this family also has the last name Starling. I kind of forgot about that when I picked my two books, but completely different though. So I stumbled upon this book via a book challenge that I do every year. The prompt was to pick a book you know nothing about based solely on the cover. And as you can imagine, working at a library can make that prompt kind of difficult, but I am so happy to have found this absolute gem of a book. In it, we're introduced to Emma Starling. As a child, Emma was born with the natural ability to heal people, and her parents tried to keep the town people from abusing that power. And so they for the most part, they stay away from it, but they will high five Emma as she walks down the street to try to get a little bit of that power. However, when we meet Emma, she is a college dropout coming home to help care for her father who is dying, and she has lost that ability to heal, so she won't be able to save her father. All the while, her mother is judging her, her childhood best friend is missing, her brother has returned from another rehab stay, and Emma must settle for a job as a substitute teacher at the local school. All the while, in the background, there is this Greek chorus of the town's past residents who now reside in the local cemetery. And since they can't go anywhere, They naturally know the town gossip, who's mad at who and who's leaving who, but overall, they just want the living residents to be happy. Meanwhile, Emma's father, Clive Starling, who is a retired rock star, kind of think Ozzy Osbourne, has started hallucinating the ghost of Edward Harold Baines, a long dead resident of the town, who was known to keep bears, boars, foxes, and wolves in his home. And he was a real person. Look him up. He actually did keep those animals in his house. And yeah, that was an interesting tidbit that I took away from this book. Anyway, said ghost convinces Clive that he should also purchase a fox as a companion for himself and his dog, as you do. I'm sure all of this probably sounds a little bit sad and serious, but this book had me laughing out loud much more than it made me cry, and it did make me cry. I haven't been able to shut up about it since I read it, and I just want someone else to read this book so I can talk about it with them. It's just the perfect mix of quirky, weird, and emotional that will get me every time. And I will hand it over to Angie.
Great. Just like Sarah said up top, I also have 2 nonfiction titles to share with you. The first is Blood Orange Night, My Journey to the Edge of Madness. This book needs a trigger warning that it discusses physical dependence and addiction, so take care if those topics can be distressing to you. Blood Orange Night is a memoir about the author's experience with benzodiazepine addiction and withdrawal. As a new mom of an infant daughter and a 1-year-old special needs son, Melissa Bond sought help for her insomnia in the form of prescription drugs from her doctor. She started with Ambien, but it almost immediately stopped working, and she tried a new doctor who came highly recommended. He started her on Ativan, and that's when her entire life changed. She was overprescribed, and although she took the medication exactly as directed, she became dependent. By the time she realized what was happening, her body was becoming more tolerant of the drugs, and the doctor continued to increase her doses. She was stuck in a vicious cycle, and she still wasn't even sleeping. She started to lose control, first of her mind, losing her memory and blackouts, and then she couldn't control her body anymore. It got worse until one day when she lost all of her strength and dropped her daughter. Thankfully, nobody was hurt. Everyone was okay, but this was the wake-up call that Melissa needed to know that she needed to change. She learned that quitting cold turkey could have even worse side effects and possible death. So she takes the reader on her journey, years long, to slowly wean herself off of the medications. This book was eloquently written in a powerful narrative voice. Melissa is so open about the toll her insomnia and her anxiety took on her work, her marriage, and her other relationships. And unlike opioid dependence, which I've read a lot of books about, I don't hear much about benzodiazepine dependence, and I hope that her story raises awareness. My second book is much different. The Cat's Meow, How Cats Evolved from the Savannah to Your Sofa. And I'll start with an anecdote that I think most cat owners have heard, which is this. If you happen to pass away in your home and your cat is there alone, the cat will waste no time in eating your remains, like immediately, maybe the next meal. And I'm here to tell you that that is scientifically untrue. In fact, dogs are much more likely to do that. So I don't know why cats get such a bad reputation. So myth busted. The author, Jonathan Lossis, is a professor at WashU and an expert in evolutionary biology. And he wrote this book through the lens of both a biologist and a cat lover. I wanted to share just a couple quick things that I learned. First of all, the things that we consider domesticated cats are actually barely domesticated, and they're nearly indistinguishable from wild cats in their DNA. In fact, big cats and house cats even share the same body language. For example, if a cat has her tail raised upright, that sends a signal that they're friendly. And cats at your house will do it, as well as ones that you see at the zoo. I would love to demonstrate that for you, but my cat is hiding right now because she's a cat. So the book was very informative. It's not overly scientific. It features charming illustrations, and it is a treat for any cat lover. Up next, we will hear from Robin.
Hello, I'm Robin, and the first book that I picked is from T. Kingfisher. It is the same author as an earlier pick, however, it is a very different book. This book is called A House with Good Bones, and I picked it because every single October I read absolutely any scary thing I can find and watch all the scary movies. So I was kind of wandering through the library looking for something scary, and this caught my eye. So I knew nothing about it before I picked it up. As soon as I started reading it, I was kind of hooked. It starts with a woman named Sam who has one of the absolutely best and strangest jobs I've ever heard of. She's an archaeoetymologist, and she studies ancient bugs at archaeological digs. When the book starts, she is waiting for her next job to start up, and she decides to spend her time visiting her mother. As soon as she gets there, she notices that some things don't seem quite right. First of all, her mother lives in a house that she inherited from her grandmother. And one of the first things they did was they completely redecorated it so it would be their taste. And when Sam walks into the door, she notices that the house looks much more like her grandmother's style and not so much like her mother's. Then she notices that her mother is just acting strange in general. There are vultures lurking around the mailboxes. And there are absolutely no bugs in their garden, which is something that an archaeoetymologist would absolutely notice. Besides that, her brother and his wife no longer come to the home to visit, and things get even stranger. I enjoyed this author's tone. It was fast-paced and easy to read. There were some humorous situations throughout and some really good and strong characters. All of it's mixed together with a sense of like real creepiness and this sort of vague, uncomfortable feeling that there is definitely something wrong here. Some of those hints are things like nightmares around her grandmother that may or may not be real memories being recovered, a surprisingly unnerving garden, a strange neighbor who her grandmother used to always call a witch. There are also some fairly serious family secrets that need to be uncovered and faced with in this book. I don't really want to give too much away, so I will say that besides my recommendation for this book, if you're looking for something scary, I did force my mother to read this, and she absolutely loved it as well. So that's my first book, T. Kingfisher, A House with Good Bones, and my second book is very different. It is a cookbook. I am not big on cooking, and I don't do a lot of cookbooks. This is Baking Yesteryear, the best recipes from the 1900s to the 1980s. It's by B. Dylan Hollis. And B. Dylan Hollis, I came across maybe a year ago, and he was doing a lot of TikTok videos. What he did was he would make jokes and he would try these really old recipes that had all kinds of different ingredients or strange combinations to me. And he used a really big sense of humor. So after I started watching this, he announced he was going to have a cookbook. And as soon as I found out about it, I couldn't help looking for it. And I'm glad I found it. It starts with as soon as you open it up, it kind of gives you like basic cookbook stuff. It tells you about measurements, it tells you his backstory and how he ended up writing a cookbook. The basic tips and measurements and how to cook is fantastic for people like me who know nothing about that sort of thing, but a lot of people I know have told me they just skip that part and go straight to the actual cookbook part. So whenever he goes through these recipes, he starts by giving you a little bit of backstory. And these recipes start in the 1900s and go through the 1980s, and each chapter is like a decade. And it's amazing how much history and nostalgia is wrapped up in these recipes. Some of the earliest recipes use different measurements than what we use today, like use something, put in something the size of a walnut. Some are focused on making do with very little, like during the Depression era. He starts with a few paragraphs of history of the dish and some of his thoughts on it, and that's when you can really see some of his humor. One of the dishes from the 1900s he talks about is the sand tort, and he starts off by saying, "Sand in a cake is pretty high on my list of things that are both utterly unpleasant and completely avoidable, right beneath being trapped in a phone booth with a frenzied pigeon. This does end up being one of the recipes that he tries, and he says is very good. And he does taste all of these recipes so you can know what you're getting into. One of the stranger recipes to me is from the 1930s, and it's called a mock apple pie. It's made entirely without apples, and most of it is made of sugar and Ritz crackers. This is clearly something that's probably from the Depression because it's 1930s, so making do with very little. This recipe is something he claims is a very good pie, and it actually works really well as an apple pie. It's one of the recipes I have not yet made, so I'm a little suspicious as of now, but I am going to try it. And then the nostalgia part for me came in with recipes like ambrosia. That's something that was from the 1950s decade, and it reminded me of a dish that would appear at every family picnic that I went to throughout my childhood. And just like my first book, there is a bit of a connection. There is something with an element of fear when it comes to this cookbook, because that very last chapter is called The Worst of the Worst. And it has recipes that do fill me with fear, such as jellied meatloaf. He ends up with a he describes it with a serving suggestion that it should be served, quote, bleakly in individual rounds of shame. This is one that he does not recommend trying, but it seemed pretty interesting. And so those were two of my absolutely favorite books this year. And thank you so much.
Thanks, Robin. That sounds really great. My name is KB, and I have a couple picks for you tonight as well. Thanks everyone for coming. Okay, so my first pick is called We Do What We Do in the Dark, and this is a debut novel from author Michelle Hart, and it's a literary fiction story, and the story is about Mallory, who is a young woman who has just begun college shortly after losing her mother. So Mallory begins her year understandably feeling quite depressed, very isolated, and she's just kind of floating. She's very much on her own path, very separate from her peers around her. She's a very introspective character and narrator, and as the reader, we get a very close insight into her thoughts and feelings, almost like a camera's over her shoulder the whole time. Like it's a very close journey with Mallory. And the plot begins when Mallory develops a fascination and connection with a professor at her college. She's an older woman who is also married to a man. But quickly, this professor also forms a connection with Mallory, and this story continues to center on their flawed and intense relationship between the two of them, while continuing to strictly follow only Mallory's perspective. And it goes as far as never even naming the other woman for the entirety of the book. It's just Mallory and the woman. So even though it's a relatively short novel, it clocks in at about 230 pages, which for these days is so short. The story is so gripping and the writing is just exquisite. The tone of it is very muted, but intentional and just so succinct and just really great writing. And the story itself reads less like a typical romance and more like a character study or coming of age novel. The story explores really dramatic feelings of loneliness and grief and desire, but the book manages to maintain a curious and very cerebral tone, and it doesn't slip too far into that like dark and depressing territory. It reminded me a lot of the novel The Price of Salt, which was the basis for the movie Carol. And it was a real standout from other literary fiction and other LGBT fiction I read this year, and I really loved it. Okay, so my next book is very different, but also some similar themes of isolation and loneliness. And that second pick is Mary Shelley's classic Frankenstein. So published a little over 200 years ago, it's obviously not the most timely recommendation of the program tonight, but this was my first time reading it this year, and it truly was my favorite book of the year. I was shocked. I try to read a few classics a year, especially the ones I missed in school, and I just loved reading this book. So I'll tell you a little bit about that experience. So Frankenstein is widely considered the first popular work of science fiction, but it also definitely has strong elements of Gothic fiction and horror, and it's very literary as well. And we all know the general plot. A young scientist, Victor Frankenstein, experiments with creating life in the form of a sentient monster who he then immediately abandons out of fear and disgust. So going into this assuming I know the plot already, I kind of know how this goes, I was quickly proven completely wrong by many elements of the story that were very different than I expected, or that have been like completely lost in translation in terms of like general knowledge of the story over the last 2 centuries. So the biggest example of one of those surprises is that the monster or the creature in Shelley's novel is so rich and complex. He's a dreamer and a deep feeler. He teaches himself everything. He teaches himself how to read and write and think, and he ends up becoming this like philosopher, and he's so deep and interesting. And when the creature is abandoned by his creator, he turns to books himself to learn about society, reading all of these classics, having all of these existential debates with himself and thoughts. And it's really so different than the sort of like murmuring, like nonverbal, depiction that most of us think of when we think of Frankenstein's monster. So that was so different and interesting to me. And the whole story is very emotional. It's also very thrilling and adventurous, and just so beautiful. Shelley's prose is very accessible as well, even for being 200 years old. She's a fabulous writer, and I just loved the journey that reading this in 2023 took me on. So yeah, I very much recommend it. And that's all for me. So I will go ahead and hand it off to Sarah L. Thank you.
All right. Hello, everyone. I am the third Sarah. So I'm going to talk to you first about my favorite book of 2023. 2023 has been the year of the cozy fantasy for me. I didn't know about the existence of cozy fantasy. It is the best genre for me. I love it so much. It's fantasy, but the stakes are small. The world's not going to end. Things are just bad for one person or a few people. Or maybe there's nothing bad at all. It's just cozy. So Assistant to the Villain is great if you like shows like The Office or Parks and Rec. It's very much like an office setting. It's very silly. It's lovable lead characters. It's a grumpy sunshine romance. It's got an engaging story. I laughed so much reading this book. I just kept giggling. Some important things to note, there is quite a bit of cursing, so if that's something you don't like in your books, this probably isn't the one for you. There are also a couple of flashbacks to assaults that happen to the 2 main characters. They are flashbacks, so you know the characters are going to be all right. They give a little bit of backstory, but you can totally skip them. They're not vital to the plot, so don't let that scare you away. The other thing I like to let people know, it is book 1 of a series. Book 2 is not coming out till fall of 2024. I'm very sad about that. And to just wrap up this book, I'll give you a quote from the very beginning of the book, just the intro. She'd put him at no more than 28, 29. That couldn't be right, though. There must have been a rule somewhere that evil overlords needed to be at least 50, maybe 60 if they were pushing it, but not young, and not, even more disastrously, beautiful. So that's the first book. Cannot recommend it enough. And my second book is Tress of the Emerald Sea. This book was inspired by when Brandon Sanderson and his family were watching The Princess Bride, and he and his wife were talking, and they're like, what if Buttercup had gone after Wesley when he disappeared instead of just letting him disappear? And there's little like bits of the story that you can tell it was inspired by The Princess Bride, but it's very much its own story. It's a classic Brandon Sanderson in that it's got a strong female lead. It's another cozy fantasy. It's a really sweet story. If you've read a lot of Brandon Sanderson, it does have Easter eggs from some of his other series in it, but you don't need to have read those because one of the main Easter eggs, I've not read that series at all, and you don't need it for the series. It's got a huge cast of really lovable supporting characters, including a talking rat it's fantastic. And on top of all of that, it's got some disability representation. 2 of the characters, one is deaf and the other has microplegia, I believe it's how it's pronounced. which I learned about through this book, where objects appear smaller than they actually are. Yeah, it's a great story, and just it's so sweet. He wrote it as a gift to his wife, and she basically was like, "No, seriously, you should publish this." And to sum up this book, I have a quote from our narrator. I, however, would trade a dozen Lingies for one person who is willing to sit down for a single blasted minute and think about what they are doing. Tress is a really amazing main character, and she does all of these wonderful and amazing things, and just does not realize how fantastic she is the entire time, and she keeps accidentally doing fantastically. So those are my two books that I very much loved this year. Now it's on to Blake.
Thanks, Sarah. I have read over 300 books this year, so it was really hard to pick my favorites, but two of them that I had to share with you guys tonight. The first one is The Minuscule Mansion of Myra Malone by Audrey Burgess. It's a unique and charming gem that I read early on in the year, and it still has a hold on me. We meet Myra Malone, who creates a blog dedicated to her inherited dollhouse that she starts to amass followers who anxiously wait for each blog post update. Across the country, Alex Rakes lives in an identical mansion to Myra's dollhouse that was passed down to him by his grandmother, who mysteriously disappeared. He contacts Myra to search for answers because why is there a woman who has an exact duplicate of his home on the other side of the country? Looking back at this read, it was unique, quirky, and a clever story. There were fabulous characters and a whole lot of heart. Read this if you want a touch of magic, a large dose of friendship, and a little bit of romance. This is also for you if you like contemporary fiction with a touch of magic. I highly recommend this book if you liked The Wishing Game by Meg Schaefer or At the Coffee Shop of Curiosities by Heather Weber. My next book is called The Pineapple Street by Jenny Jackson, and it was my second choice for favorite book of the year, even though it was really hard to choose. One thing about me as a reader is I love books that have wealthy characters where there's lots of drama and someone gets killed or murdered. This was one that was only full of drama, unfortunately, but I loved it nonetheless. The author takes three women in one family and examines some of the issues affecting the wealthy in this rich people with first world problems novel. The story is told from sisters Darlie and Georgiana and their sister-in-law Sasha. Darlie chose to give up her inheritance in order for her husband to avoid signing a prenup. He is a successful banker, and they are doing just fine for now. Sasha married Cord, the middle child of the Stockton family, and tries to accept the family's extreme level of closeness. Sasha doesn't come from a family with this type of wealth and doesn't always feel welcomed by them. Georgiana is the baby, and after falling for the wrong guy, she begins to spiral and question the life she was raised having. I thought the book was hilarious and entertaining, and at the same time heartwarming. One thing that I loved about this book as a reader is that you get to know the characters, be around their daily lives, meet the folks who dare to marry into the family, and see how life changes them as the story develops. This book would be great for fans of The Kindest Lie by Nancy Johnson or The Nest by Cynthia Sweeney. And I'm going to pass it over to Paige.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Last but certainly not least, my first book that I read this year that I absolutely love, it was actually the first book that I read in 2023 this year, is The House in the Cerulean Sea by TJ Klune. This book is just, I can't even put into words. I think about this book every single day. I finished this book. I gave it to my husband. I was like, please read this immediately. We follow Linus Baker, who is a caseworker for the department in charge of the care of magical youth. And he is sent out to the House in the Cerulean Sea, which is kind of an orphanage of sorts for magical youth. And he's sent there to observe and kind of see, like, make sure the kids are okay, make sure the caretaker is doing what he's supposed to. And then it kind of turns into a journey of self-discovery. Linus has kind of lost himself to the monotony of being a caseworker in rows and desks every day, sitting at his computer. And he's lost himself, so he ends up finding himself and so much more in this book. One of the quotes on the front of the copy that I have by V.E. Schwab is, it's like being wrapped up in a big gay blanket. And honestly, that is so perfect. a very perfect description of this book. It's also very relevant to the world that we live in today, standing up for others, standing up for what you believe in, and that's okay to do. Yeah, 10 out of 10. I'm tripping over myself because it's just so good. And then my next book is Where'd You Go, Bernadette? And this year was the third time that I've read this book, and I'm actually working on reading it for a fourth time again before the end of the year. This book is told through a series of faxes and handwritten notes, email correspondence, and some newspaper articles and transcriptions of online articles and videos to tell us the story of Bernadette and kind of her life. Bernadette is a wife and a mother, and she has also lost herself in the throes of being the mother of a child who was born prematurely and who had up-teen surgeries before she was 5 years old, and then just kind of being stuck in that place. This story is so beautiful, and I've never felt so seen by a main character in any book. She has an online virtual assistant who ends up not really being a virtual assistant. I'm not going to spoil it for you, but she kind of trauma dumps every time she sends an email to this person. I'm like, oh my gosh, I think that I do that sometimes. If you are looking for a book that shows you the love that a family has for each other and the love that daughters have for their mothers, this is an absolutely fabulous book, and I could not recommend it more. So yeah, now we're going to go back to Sarah.
Awesome. Thank you, Paige. All right. Well, thank you to all of our presenters tonight. Such really interesting picks. Like I said, picks that really say a lot about you and the things that you find interesting and love. So, if you out there, if this was not enough reading suggestions for you and you would like more reading suggestions, we invite you to try out our personalized reading service. It's a form that you fill out on the website where you tell us what you like and what you don't like, and we will create a list of 5 titles just for you. You can find it on the website under the Books, e-Media, and More section. And right now we have our winter reading challenge going on. It started December 1st and it runs through January 31st. You can read books and complete activities to earn raffle entries for really cool prizes. In fact, attending this program is something that you can count off. And I believe also watching something on YouTube. So if you watch one of our other programs on YouTube, that is also a box that you can check off. You can pick up a log at the branches, and you can also sign up through the Beanstack app. That's the same app that you use for summer reading challenge as well. So enter winter reading challenge. It's a really fun time. And then I just want to let you know about a couple of upcoming programs that you might be interested in. We are having another virtual book talk program next month on Wednesday, January 24th. It's called Wonderful Winter Reads. So it'll all be kind of books that are nice to read in the winter time. And that should be a really fun one. That is open for registration already, and I will put a link in a follow-up email. And then also, SLCL has some really great author events. In fact, Blake, who was presenting tonight, she is our author events coordinator. And so she might take a second to tell us about an upcoming author event that she is particularly excited about. But if you haven't been to an author event, you really should. We have one of the best author event series of any library that I've encountered. So take a chance to see one of your favorite authors up close and personal. And with that, we're gonna take some questions. Feel free to put your questions in the chat. I'm gonna say here, chat is open. Questions. So feel free to put your questions in the chat. And I'm gonna invite all of our presenters to turn their cameras back on, and I'm gonna put us into gallery mode and stop sharing my screen. Let's see here. Gallery mode. All right. So if you have a question, please go ahead and put it in the chat. Let's see here. I don't see any questions yet. I did see someone who said thank you and said that they added many of our books to their TBR. So thank you so much. But yeah, I'm gonna ask Blake, do you have an author event coming up that you're really excited about?
Yeah, I have a couple. I'm a huge mystery thriller reader. So we have Rachel Hawkins who's coming again. She was here last year with us in January. She's coming back. She'll be at Grants View on Tuesday, January 16th. She writes thrillers under that name, but she also writes witchy adult romance novels under the name Erin Sterling. So if you've read those books as well, you will also enjoy that talk. So she's fantastic. She's a huge Bravo reality television fan. So we get to talk about all kinds of stuff like murder and mystery and all kinds of other like fun things like that. We also have another thriller writer, Stacey Willingham, is coming back. She's got a new book called Only If You're Lucky, and she'll be at Grants View again on January 19th. So 2 thriller writers coming in January, and we're really excited about those. And then Chain Gang All Stars has gotten some great publicity, and I think it just became the finalist for the National Book Award. And so he will be at Washington University. We're partnering with them while the Clark family is under construction, and hopefully pass that as well. But he will be there at Washington University on January 31st at 7 p.m. So if you're a fan of Chain Gang All Stars, come check out that event.
Awesome. Thanks, Blake.
You're welcome.
Let's see. We do have a question in the chat. Someone is asking about cozy. When did cozy become a genre and what defines that description? And I'll just pop in, and if any of you want to follow up, feel free. But it kind of started with mystery. So cozy mysteries have been an established genre for quite some time. In fact, yeah, we had a cozy mystery con earlier this year. But yeah, cozies generally in the mystery genre, for example, all the violence takes place off the page, and it usually takes place in either a small town or a close neighborhood type setting. And there is, relationships play a bigger role in it than just like the murder and mayhem. And often it's like an amateur type detective, although sometimes it can be like a small town sheriff, that sort of thing. But yeah, it's there's always sort of good vibes. It ends on the mystery's always solved, and usually it ends with like kind of a happy ending. I mean, obviously someone has usually died, but they they catch the murderer, and it kind of brings the town together, the neighborhood together. Well, recently, this sort of coziness has come into other genres like fantasy and romance, and it has many of the similar things where a lot of like the more intense parts of those stories take place off page. Often the stakes are a bit smaller, and they again take place usually in a small town or a close neighborhood setting, and friendships and relationships take a kind of a front seat. So yeah, with cozy fantasy, often instead of like saving the world, you're like saving something much smaller, like a coffee house or one castle or a cat, something like that. So yeah, so it's a fun time. Sarah L., what drew you to cozy fantasy this year?
So cozy fantasy for me started with what is the, I'm blanking on the name. Paige, what is the name?
Is it Legends and Lattes?
Legends and Lattes.
So I heard about Legends and Lattes, and I read Legends and Lattes. I'm like, I didn't know fantasy came in cozy. I love little like slice of life books, and so when I found out that I could have my fantasy books where I get my magic and adventure and all of that, but I could also have it be cute, I was just like, oh, this is perfect. And then I read every cozy fantasy I could find. I love so much that it's just sweet, and the violence is not really the focus, which is hilarious considering one of them is called Assistant to the Villain. He is the villain. Like that is his role. But it's somehow still very sweet and sincere and adorable. And sure, it talks about torturing and murdering people, but that all kind of is, like you said, off page. It's over there. We don't worry about it. And it was so nice to have something warm and cozy.
Yeah, and I'll give a shout out to TC's pick, Song for the Wild Boat, which is sort of a cozy sci-fi. So which you might think that that's like really weird, but it is. It's, I don't know, it's a cozy book. Dex is a tea monk. I mean, I don't know, can't get more cozy than that. Yeah, so that's cozy. It's a good time. So if you like vibes, definitely check out the cozy subgenre of any of your favorite genres. Let's see, do we have any other questions? Don't see any other questions in the chat, and we are a little bit over time, and I want to respect all of your schedules since I know some of you are at work, and some of you have had a very long day where you already worked the whole day and then have come back to present with us tonight. So thank you to all of you. I hope it was really fun for all of you that attended, to see, you know, staff from all over the library system. And like I said, from some departments that you don't normally see, like author events and bookmobile and training and acquisitions, that kind of thing. So we hope that you all have a wonderful end of the year, and that yeah, you see us at another virtual or in-person program soon. So with that, I think we will end it here. Good night, everyone. See you again. Bye-bye.